The job is just to get it here and get it to your own market. There was plenty of market for everybody. Now, having said that, there was blood in the streets.
Yeah.
The Colombians were brutal. Thank God it's not a war in the streets like we used to have, like you see in the movies, with people getting, bodies in trunks and machine gunning, and, that's gone. Thank God that's over.
So for today's Deviant Off Script, it's a kind of an interesting talk with a guy named Ken Behr. If you are familiar with the 80s and the cocaine market in America and the drug market in America, you know that a lot of that centered on Miami, South Beach. And Ken Behr is a guy that spent a lot of years in Miami, a lot of years in South Beach. He's done some interesting things. He's seen some interesting things. And he put all of that in a book called One Step Over the Line. And what's interesting about Ken is that despite his years as a drug smuggler, drug trafficker, drug dealer, he eventually went to work for the DEA. He flipped. So he's a guy that will tell you, and as you'll hear in the conversation, he's a guy that still looks over his shoulder, has a lot of enemies in a lot of places that, he knows about, doesn't know about, frankly. But it's a really interesting conversation to hear from someone who's been on that side of things. And so we hope you'll enjoy this conversation with Ken Behr. Thanks for listening. Ken Behr, how is the weather in South Florida today?
It's a beautiful day, a little chilly for us Floridians, but just a beautiful day. The sun, I was actually going to suggest that we shoot outside so that we can put the palm trees and the boats behind us and really, bring your listeners and viewers into the South Florida. So.
Well, so look, you've got a very interesting story, and we're going to get to all that. And it's very, how do you say, South Florida centric, as it were.
Yes.
But before we get to kind of why you're here and kind of the crazy tales of your life, kind of give me the brief version of you, Ken Behr, and kind of your upbringing, your youth, your, kind of those formative years.
So it's an interesting story. I mean, especially if you've a little older like me, but I was raised on a farm in New Jersey. I was born in 1957. I know I'm an old guy. So I was raised in the simplest of Norman Rockwell lifestyles. We had my grandfather had a farm. We had a house on the farm property. Very, they built actually a grade school behind my house. My grandfather sold them the land, and I would literally go to school and then walk to my grandmother's, jump a couple, cow pen fences, eat lunch. Our dog would end up in the principal's office occasionally. They'd page us over the loudspeaker. Very Norman Rockwell America, if anybody understands that art form, or just very, old world. And then in 1969, my father got transferred to the family business in New Orleans. So I went from, as I say in the book, from the Norman Rockwell Northeast of America into the Sodom and Gomorrah of the Deep South. And right about that time, that was 1969, my grandfather and then my father died just a few months later. So I had my older brother, but no real male influences in my life. And it was it was the coming of, hair, Woodstock, the age of Aquarius, bell bottoms, hippies in the streets, especially in New Orleans, which is kind of a San Francisco, funky kind of place versus the farms in New Orleans. So that was my upbringing. I was kind of went through a quick shock from being very naive to being very like, holy cow.
Yeah. So you mentioned not having, a male role model in your life as a youngster. And I'll circle back to that. But when did you first kind of start seeing life on the other side of the law? And, I don't even mean like, when you were heavy into it, but when is the first time Ken Behr kind of dipped his toes in, this isn't necessarily legal, or this isn't something we should be doing?
Well, so here's the thing. Right before my father passed, We were sitting in the pool, and he said, "Did you try drugs?" And I said, "No." And he says, "Well, if anybody ever offers you drugs," because he knew I was, 13 and starting to run with, a different crowd, not bad crowd, actually very wealthy kids, and sometimes the wealthiest kids, in the, are the ones with the most drugs and money and time.
Sure.
Yeah, divorced parents and stuff like that. And right after that, he passed. And like right after that, I smoked a joint. And the next thing I did, remember it's 1970, I did a four-way hit of orange sunshine acid. So a four-way hit was I took a quarter of something the size of, a little piece of paper, and I was high for about 8 hours. And so in those days, what people have to understand is, once you smoked your first joint, actually, the Yippie, I can't remember his name right now, but there was actually a quote that said, once you smoke your first joint, you become an enemy of society. And you could go to jail for a year. So, and by the way, how were you going to get a joint? You had to commit a crime to get a joint by either buying one or somebody selling you one.
Yeah.
Right? If you went to your friend and said, can I buy a couple joints off you? That's a drug deal. And in Louisiana in 1970, I had hair down the middle of my back after my dad died. I let my hair grow out. Just listening to Crosby, Stills, Nash and Young.
You were already kind of going against the grain, being in the Deep South with long hair.
Oh,
yeah,
buddy. We used to, sometimes you have to hide when you're walking down the street if you see the wrong, But yeah. It's funny. I'll tell you a funny story I've never told him. But I remember there was an old Southern man in a rocking chair, kind of on a porch, like the exact thing you would think if you imagined.
Yep.
And he said, "Boy, I know why you got that long hair." And I said, "Why is that, sir?" He says, "Because the girls like it. If the girls didn't like it, you'd cut it right off." And you know what? I walked away thinking to myself, yeah, I think he's right.
Yeah.
If you're not cool, if you're 13, you're trying to find your, I remember, I didn't even know, I remember smoking weed going back to school that next summer, beginning of the school year, thinking I was cool. And it turned out everybody was smoking weed, even the debutantes, as I say in my book, the good girls were smoking pot. So I was a little late to the party at that point, I think, strangely enough.
So, obviously weed was pretty prevalent in your adolescence.
Yeah.
God, it's the 70s, right?
Yeah.
When did that become kind of dabbling in coke, and when did the Ken Behr that we know from the book really kind of take root?
So what happened was my mother, in all fairness, she was from Brooklyn. She's in the deep south of New Orleans. My family had roots there. She did not. It's on my father's side. So in 1973, she decides to get us away from the crime in the inner city. And New Orleans was not bad, but to move us to sunny South Florida, where there was a bunch more New Yorkers. She had some friends down here. And that was going from the frying pan into the fire. Because at that exact time, 1973, 1974, was the drug explosion. Because what happened was, before that, you had marijuana coming from Mexico and even Jamaica, and coming into like New Orleans, marijuana was terrible. It wasn't great. It was stems and seeds, and the old song, stems and seeds you don't need, from Cheech and Chong. Yeah. Then we moved to Florida, and all of a sudden the closest South American landmass from Florida is Colombia. Sure. So then the pot was just so good. We had these great buds, and the explosion happened. People went from bringing in a couple 100 pounds of weed to freighters full and tons full. I smuggled my first load of weed. I think I was 19. I was on the run from a cocaine charge, a bullshit charge, living in Jamaica, and I smuggled 600 pounds of really good lamb's breath out. And I wasn't really into smuggling. Most of my career was running drugs, but I'd probably done maybe a dozen smuggling trips just by strange coincidence, because I guess was fun or the money was in it. But so that was when I started selling pot, and and a lot of, and it started getting more and more. But we were selling coke in high school, but we were buying a quarter ounce and selling grams, or buying an ounce and selling quarters and grams, and and it just got bigger. At one point, I was running 1,000 pounds at a time up to my partner in Ohio of weed, and coke. Coke went, and not that. What happened was, as the government started crushing down on the marijuana smuggling. Look, you can a bale of marijuana is about 50 pounds. It takes up about the size of a large suitcase, right? It comes in burlap, wrapped in duct tape. That same burlap bag back then, a pound of, I used to buy 1,000 pounds for about, let's say 245,000. So $245 a pound. You know, in those dollars today, I mean, to me, it was like, oh, that's like $1 million today. You know, it's like crazy. If I was a kid and knew I had that much money, I should have quit. But so that same package of cocaine could have been worth, you know, like 25 pounds of coke, or let's say 25 kilos, 50 pounds of coke at was about 35,000 a kilo. So I don't know, the math is, you know, you're talking about $10,000 worth of contraband and a bale of marijuana to like $1 million worth of cocaine.
Yeah.
Or whatever the number is. I don't have my calculator in front of me, but then, and so with the American explosion of the drugs, you know, people wanted drugs. The American government, I say in my book, they had to know. It was just 50 years earlier when Prohibition. How did they not know that if you take and I'm not saying what would have been good or what could have been done. I'm just saying the war on drugs created the blood in the streets that you saw on Miami Vice or on Blow or on, you know, when we started, we were just kids in high school. We never carried a gun. All the guys I ever smuggled drugs with or sold drugs with, they were friends of mine. You know, we were high school friends. Even when we went and did it, you know, most of the guys, like, you know, it was sailboat guys, you know, going down to Jamaica and Colombia and loading up, you know, a little bit of weed. And the business exploded as the demand for drugs in America exploded. And also, if you watch Die Hard 1, you know, Die Hard 1, the movie, the scene where the real sharp guy tries to tell the terrorist, you know, he starts doing blow in front of him, like it's a normal thing, and he shoots him. Blow was everywhere by the 1980s, everywhere. And as a drug dealer, I was selling what was in demand.
So it sounds like it was a bit of a kind of an intersection of the times, your youth, and kind of your willingness to roll the dice, right? I mean, you know, when you look at Miami in the 70s and then of course into the 80s, I mean, I think everybody kind of thinks about like the Tony Montanas of the world, right? Like I actually just watched Scarface recently, and like I guess my question to you is, what was Miami like when you got there from a drug perspective? So was it still a little bit before the Coke boom, or were you there after it happened? Like, what was the time?
No, it was all weed. I mean, I remember in 1970 something, when I left Jamaica, I was 19 or 20. I brought that first load out, and I was living at a hotel, a place called Sam Sarah in Jamaica. It's still there. It was named after two German shepherds, Sam and Sarah. When I was there, Sam was still alive, and my friend owned it, a friend of a friend, and he was a cocaine smuggler. And at that point, they were bringing in a couple kilos at a time. Like, you weren't bringing in, like, Carlos Later, he was one of the biggest cocaine smugglers in the world with Escobar and Ocho and all that. He had originally was smuggling kilos in dive tanks. They would specially cut dive tanks, right? So that was cocaine smuggling. That cocaine smuggler told me that a kilo of pure cocaine, Al told me one day if I wanted to buy one, and I was a kid, I wasn't buying a kilo. Even though I smuggled 600 pounds of weed in, I did that with partners. I had maybe invested $4,000 in the trip. You know, my share, of course, was, you know, in the smuggle. We just paid for the runway and the cops and the stuff you buy off. A kilo of cocaine was $57,000, he told me, for a pure kilo of cocaine in 1977. But let's say 78, but let's say you took that, cut it in fours. Now you turn $57,000 into $250,000. That's crazy how much money was involved. When I did my last cocaine smuggling trip, We did 300 kilos of cocaine in 1985, 86. I wasn't the big guy. I was just one of the guys, we're all friends. Kind of did it because it was fun. I was paying between 10 and 11,000 a kilo. Now I was on the runway. I'm getting it right from the plane, but I couldn't, even if I had it for 10,000, I couldn't sell it for more than 11 because there was so much cocaine in the market in Florida that the spread wasn't there. Yeah. By the way, when I first started selling weed, there was so much weed in Florida that if I tried to sell 1,000 pounds of weed and mark it up more than $5 a pound, I wouldn't find a buyer. I had to ship it to Ohio. Anybody that made money selling weed had a partner in Michigan, Ohio, Indiana, somewhere where you could have a spread in the market. Yeah. Because South Florida, if someone smuggled in 60,000 pounds of weed, but most of us everybody I knew sold weed, and everybody I knew probably knew somebody that was part of that 60,000 pound smuggle. So weed was everywhere. And then, not to get confusing, coke was everywhere.
Right.
And then weed and coke was everywhere.
Yeah. Yeah. So at the height of your operation, how big were the tentacles? I mean, you talked about having people, did you have law enforcement that you were paying? Did you have people at the airport? No. I think, again, what we all kind of envision is like this Tony Montana huge infrastructure.
No.
Walk me through what your operation looked like in South Florida.
So let me just say something. I know when you add up all the pieces, I sound like some huge drug operator, but I was just we were all doing it. I mean, there were so many guys like me. Now, not saying that I didn't have an operation. I did. I had an operation. I had people that worked for me. We really didn't. Some of my friends, it was so everywhere that a lot of my friends were criminals, and part of their family was law enforcement. So I didn't have my fingers into paying off cops, but I'll give you a quick story. I got home invaded. I got tied up and robbed, and we knew these guys were going around. They had robbed another friend of mine. So one of my the guys that I did the big cocaine smuggling trip with and did other smuggling trips with, they all came to my house after I got, I untied myself. I threw them 10 grand. These guys, I had 2 kilos of coke hidden. I had so many secret compartments in my little house that there was one I couldn't get into. I had 2 kilos of coke at the time, about 35,000 a piece hidden. And so one of my crew goes over, and they know a kid that knows the people that robbed us. We started to figure out who it was. Remember, we all grew up it was Hollywood, Fort Lauderdale, 70s, 80s, small town, man. Yeah. Maybe not small like you think, but pretty small town. It was only a couple bars to go to at night and party. Everybody kind of knew everybody. So,
and there's only so many people in the game that you're in, right?
Right. And I'm hanging out in the champagne rooms at night. And so I know the other smugglers and the other drug runners in the champagne room. Kind of like you see like the mob in New York. Everybody starts to know everybody.
Sure.
So my friends went and they shot a couple bullets into the soffit of this kid's house where he was staying with his parents. And houses in Florida don't have attics. So the bullets are just going into the wood. There's nobody you can that was before cell phones. The kids start calling. The kid starts calling. They all start calling each other, right? Off their home phones and their business phones. Well, one of my friends, whose relative was a cop, the sister worked for the phone company. So we traded her some coke to pull the phone logs of so we knew we were able in the book. It's that chapter goes, I think it's called the hunted become the hunters. So now we were hunting them down, and we put a contract on them to kill them. Thank God that never happened, because I wouldn't want to do that. They ended up that wasn't my idea. Let's just say it's in the book. And, but that just shows, I know we brought a load of coke into Homestead Air Force Base. I know that my friend landed a plane load of coke into Homestead Air Force Base. Now, did the American military know about it? Or was there just a couple soldiers who, that had control of the runway on a sleepy Sunday night and made a deal with I don't know how he pulled it off, but he landed the load right in the back of the Air Force Base.
It's like in American Gangster when Denzel's shuttling all the heroin out of Vietnam, and he's just got this constant cycle coming through the military base.
Well, I had a friend of mine when I was a young smuggler tell me, and when I was a young kid, a smuggler said to me, "Kid, when I land in Colombia in my little plane and we're doing this bucket brigade loading little marijuana," he goes, "there's government C-111 cargo planes with soldiers and forklifts loading marijuana."
Being in South Florida in the 80s, obviously everybody thinks about Pablo Escobar, right?
Yeah,
And the cartel, but it's funny because you're talking about kind of this being also a small town,
yeah.
and kind of everybody knowing each other. Were you finding yourself going up against them
Nah.
in terms of trafficking and smuggling, or was there any kind of overlap there?
Well, remember, the Colombians really weren't the smugglers. Americans smuggled the drugs, and the Colombians just supplied them. Now, Carlos later really showed Escobar and Ochoa. I mean, I don't know. I can't remember. They're two different families, two different factions, but he really showed them that they should start smuggling drugs. Carlos later is a famous smuggler. Everybody can Google him. He used to stay at a friend of mine's house on Griffin Road, right down the street from my house. A guy I used to actually front blow to, through different cycles of our, incarnations. But and so the Colombians didn't care. They didn't care. I tell a story in the book about a friend of mine, my friend Nathan, the one that we did the cocaine smuggling trips with, looking for a load of coke. So a friend of mine who had been in jail in Colombia, he introduced me to a Colombian that had come up from Miami looking for American transport. This guy wasn't, a Viva Zapata gun belt, he was a professional 40-something-year-old businessman, very respectful. Obviously, he was Colombian. He had the product. No, they weren't fighting amongst themselves about who got the coke here first. The job is just to get it here and get it to your own market. There was plenty of market for everybody. Now, having said that, there was blood in the streets.
Yeah.
The Colombians were brutal. I mean, there was, and that's what I say. As I said before, the longest running war, in American history is the war on drugs. It's been going on for almost 100 years, and or at least 70 or 80, since the 1970s in earnest. And there's, we spent $1 trillion. To this day, I'm an advocate for a charity called Freedom Grow. And what we do is we raise money for nonviolent cannabis prisoners to help them with their incarceration, try to get lawyers to get them out, help their families who are on the outside. There's people in jail still to this day for marijuana doing 25, 30 years in life. So the war is still going on. 250,000 Americans were arrested last year for cannabis, 92% for simple possession. So there's a drug war going on. Thank God it's not a war in the streets like we used to have, like you see in the movies with people getting, bodies in trunks and machine gunning, and, that's gone. Thank God that's over. That's all I can say.
When was when you were smuggling and kind of running all of this? Was there ever a moment or a point where you're like, man, I might be in a little bit over my head here? This is getting a little bit dicier than I thought. Or did you love it? Like, talk to me about what it was that kept you in the game.
So, it's kind of funny.
Money,
I don't
obviously,
know.
but
What's that? Well, greed. Well, I say that, by the way, I bring this up at the end of the book, somewhere in the prologue or the, epilogue, what the hell? You would have thought I would have quit, part of it, I think, was my German immigrant farm boy upbringing of work hard, and this is the greatest, I'm a first generation American. My family were immigrants. We worked hard. You believed in, the American way. And I know, crazy as that sounds, the other part of it was, yeah, just trying to be better at it, just trying to grow and make more money. Not the greed of like, I want to have a bigger boat or a bigger car. It was just trying to be successful, trying to be the best I could be at the job I did. And, I had people that work for me, and they count on you to make sure that they're making money. It becomes like owning a shoe store.
At the peak of your operation, what was your, how big was the operation monetarily? What were you looking at?
I don't know. People ask me that. One of the things that I never did really was keep any, I asked a friend of mine one time to get a light bulb. I said, they're underneath the cabinet there. And he pulled out $10,000 out of a light bulb box. Another time I went out drinking. I had this beach girlfriend I had picked up, and, she had the key to the house. We were kind of living together, cool little chick. And she called me up on the beeper, because we didn't have cell phones, yelling and screaming that I left $80,000 in a paper bag in the closet, not hidden, just $80,000 in a paper bag. And she was mad at me for, leaving it there. So we could, again, you got to look at what we did was like ants. We're just constantly doing a deal. I might have sold a kilo of coke to this guy, 10 kilos to that guy. The one thing I was doing for basically 12 years was running weed to Ohio as long as we could, because that was a great gig. I'd buy 1,000 pounds of weed. I'd put up about $70,000 or $80,000 of my own money, because I know everybody knew I had, I would get credit. In other words, I'd run 1,000 or 2,000 pounds up, whatever I could get, 1,400. Each car held about 300, give or take. And we'd have cars running back. I had so many cars running back and forth that if a big load came in, we'd have to rent cars. So we would have 3 cars normally, maybe 4, and then we'd rent another 1 or 2 from Hertz or Enterprise, put air shocks on them. So when the weed's in the trunk, it levels out, and, just drop the cars back off with the air shocks, and so that would make me $40,000 a run. Every 1,000 pounds made me about 35 or 40,000 in $1980. So it's pretty good. And then, but then again, what people don't understand is that doesn't happen all year long. Marijuana, when it was an outdoor crop before we had indoor like you have in California, is a crop. It grows, it harvests in October. You have to hang it upside down, bucket, dry it, cut it, package it, ship it. So back in my day, there was Christmas buds. Those are the great buds that, that was coming because they're fresh off, the tops of the plants. And then by the middle of the summertime, there's no pot, or there's the only thing around is the shitty pot that was sitting, that didn't sell during the season. And sometimes certain growers you could have a short grow. So just because I said I was making $40,000 a trip doesn't mean I could do trips of weed 12 months out of the year. A lot of guys that come on and tell stories leave out the fact that, that's the truth, now, but in those times I might be selling coke or jet skiing or riding on my boat or going snow skiing or whatever, playing racquetball.
So you had the weed that was, you're kind of exporting it to Ohio.
Yeah, that was my main gig.
Okay. And then the cocaine, which was largely centered in South Florida.
I would sell it. I got busted in, I'll tell you a funny story. I got busted in Massachusetts. A friend of ours had 40,000 pounds stuck in Canada that he couldn't sell. So he contacted another friend of mine, old sailboat guy, experienced.
40,000 pounds of coke.
Pot.
Okay.
40,000 pounds of coke. That's
I was going to say it's a lot of coke.
Yeah. And he couldn't sell the pot. So he wanted us to smuggle it back into Florida, into America. It's kind of going the wrong way. Remember, the farther north it goes, I bet by the time it gets to Greenland, it's really worth a lot of money. But we brought it back. I said, what? You want to smuggle it back? He left off the little fact that the stuff wouldn't get a flea high. And that's why it was sitting in a freezer. And it was in a fish factory or a fish canning company in a freezer. 40,000 pounds takes up a bit of space.
That's like 20 tons, yeah.
Yeah, it's a big room full of, well, like I said, 50 pounds is the size of a large suitcase. So 40,000, that's, yeah. So we used the seaplane. And what we did was my buddy Bob landed on a lake in Canada, filled the seaplane up with weed, and then we fly it to a lake in Maine, and then I unload it and we'd stash it in a stash house. And we did that, and till we got about 1,400. We did about 5 or 6 trips, got about 1,400 pounds, couldn't sell it. I tried to sell it in Ohio. So we agreed to move it to the DC area where Bob was from, Tyson's Corner. You know it well, I'm sure.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that's where Bob was kind of raised. So I go back up, and while I'm driving down, I get busted, and I got to spend 2 weeks in a hellhole of a jail and all this. So but Bob, let's go back to the story. Bob, while I was in jail and getting out and doing this, Bob smuggled in a load of coke. So I would literally have a stash of coke in Washington, D.C., a warehouse with kilos of coke in it. Maybe there was 50. I don't remember how many he had. And I had 2 warehouses, one with the coke, one with, I would leave the money. And I'd go back and forth to Massachusetts, where I got busted, to go to court, and stop in Virginia sometimes wearing the suit I was going to wear to court, and so have one of my guys come in and pick up a couple kilos. So I would, one time we took 10 keys to Tennessee, and on the way back, I got searched in the airport, and I had about $80,000 on me, and they tried to take me off the plane, and I have a suitcase with secret compartments that hid about 80,000 and $100 bills. Not like you go through customs with, but that if you packed it right, nobody would find it unless they, and nobody found that. I still have the suitcase today. There's just no money in it, as I say. I keep looking.
One of the things that I find fascinating about people who do and have done the work that you did is it's always surprising to me, because I always think about, if it were me, I would get exhausted with the worry of constantly having to cover my tracks, or constantly having to worry about something going wrong and it all going up, in smoke, no pun intended.
No.
Can you talk a little bit about life on that side of the law, and kind of the psychology of always having to worry if you get pulled over, if you get a speeding ticket, if you take a right on red, if something really small goes wrong, it can all just go
to hell.
To shit. Yeah.
Yeah. It's funny you say that, because that's true. I had, a number of people working for him. I used to tell them every time we went on a mission, or anytime, I said, guys, we're like a wagon wheel, and I'm in the middle. And all you guys, those spokes have to be true. We have to do it the same way every time. We have to be careful. We, remember to do this, do that, and even though, they may not listen to you, they may drive too far into the night without pulling over to get a room, or they may, whatever they're going to do. When everybody says when you do coke, you get paranoid. Well, when you do coke and you're sitting on, 10 kilos in your house, or a house full of weed that you smuggled in, you get really paranoid. But it's an interest. I mean, I never sit to this day. Now, remember, I've been a drug runner. I've been deep cover operative for the DEA. I never sit with my back to the door. I can, in any restaurant, unless the person with me has a gun, and then they can sit with the back to the door because I'm not armed. And I do that. I literally think that out. I never, I can pretty well tell you every face and every situation of every table when I sit down. I'm not saying I'm like always doing that, but something will get to me, some PTSD, something will come up, and I'll just start scanning faces. Who's in the room with me? And I mean, that's street guy stuff, but, I think that part of my whole psyche, I started when I was, let's say 13, but in earnest at 16, by 18, 19, I was working for the biggest smugglers in the world. And with them, I think my whole psyche is trained that way. From
Really?
being, remember, we were trained, never say anything, wait for your lawyer. When I got busted, I knew the first time I got in trouble, every time I got in trouble, don't say a word. I don't care how much he's threatening you, how much you're in trouble. Don't say a word. You wait until you get your lawyer. Your best deal is going to be made. Whatever deal you made is when you get a lawyer. And we would just when I was a kid, one smuggling organization, Donnie Steinberg, was the biggest smuggler, one of the biggest smugglers in the world. If you Google him, I mean, they wrote a book about him. He was like in Playboy magazine, a story about him. I used to fly in a Learjet. They'd give me a Learjet and like $1.5 million and tell me to fly to the Caymans, deposit the money, come home. And, even as a kid at 18 or 19, when I was doing that, I'm looking over my shoulder, yeah, and I talk about it in the book. I never thought I could say this out loud as a drug dealer or drug runner or smuggler, and not like a guy that was in Vietnam or Afghanistan, but I've dealt with some severe PTSD, I mean, I've kind of got over it by writing the book and by my wife looking at me and going, ain't nobody got no time for that shit. My wife cures PTSD on anybody.
Yeah.
But I mean, I've learned a lot about dealing with it. And like I said, writing the books helped a lot. But I don't watch, just so you know, I don't watch The Sopranos. I've never seen the movie Blow. I don't watch any prison shows. I also, that. I got enough reality. I've had 2 open heart surgeries, a pacemaker, watched my father die, watched other people die at my feet. I just want to see funny stuff, and, I don't mind reading about it.
How old were you when your father passed away?
13.
And how old was he?
48.
I'm curious, and I'm wondering if how much that plays into or played into your choice to kind of live a life that could have ended early at any moment.
I don't think that really, you make a good, valid point. I mean, I've never thought about it, but I don't think so. I think it was just me growing up in the times. And, part of it is, when your mother says, if Johnny jumps off the bridge, are you going to jump off too? You say, well, does he live or just break his legs? Because, everybody around me was doing it. And I know that him not being there and not having maybe somebody to guide me out of it, was probably impactful, but some of the things, I'm also an adrenaline junkie. I went racing cars, I had jet skis, everything had to be souped up and fast. And, part of it is the way I'm wired, I guess, I'm not a big opposing guy. I'm not a Navy SEAL. I'm not, any, I'm a pretty strong man physically and mentally, but, at this age, I'm just happy to be breathing oxygen.
Can you take me when this all kind of came crashing down, so to speak, for you?
Yeah.
When was the party over for Ken Behr?
Yeah, good point. Well, when I got busted in '88, I beat the case. So unfortunately, that didn't help, because now all of a sudden, I beat the law at their own game. I got pulled over with 1,400 pounds, went to court, beat the case, and ran down the street, getting high and partying. So that was '88. In '92, things had slowed down a lot. I got married. I had a 1.5-year-old daughter. We went on our wedding, and kind of funny how thing is, right? I had about 100 pounds I had stashed in a freezer, because back then you stopped doing the 1,000-pound loads. We got to doing like 100-pound loads, but the weed was like California green kind of quality, right? So now it's 800 a pound, 1,000 a pound instead of being 245. It was just better weed, it was the start of the high-end hybrid, high-end buds, the stuff we smoke today. There was, a point when pounds were 4,000 a pound. So, the good weed it wasn't as good as it is today, but it was the transition from bulk Colombian weed to high-end, Mexican. Actually, Mexico was actually growing some really high-end weed. So I had stashed about 100 pounds in a freezer waiting for the summertime to come. I paid for a wedding. I bought my wife a beautiful diamond ring from my Uncle Henry, the diamond dealer in New York. I paid for a honeymoon, took about 100 grand in cash, sold my truck, went out to Texas to get another load to bring to Ohio to sell to Terry. And Terry, my partner there, had set me up. So when I got there, I got busted. And Terry had set me up because, and we're friends now. He found me on the internet after 32 years. But listen what the government used to do to people. Terry had a house on his father's property. In the middle was a barn. He had 1,000. He had some big load of weed up there. I don't know. I don't know how much it was, but that somebody else had brought him, one of my other friends, and went behind my back and brought this load in, backstabbed me basically. And Terry got busted, and they brought him on a Sunday afternoon morning. They come in at 7 or 6 in the morning, handcuffed him on the couch, 4 kids up there screaming, his mother and father handcuffed next to him. And the cop says, the prosecutor, we're going to take your mother's house. We're going to take your father's house. We're going to put your mother in jail, your father in jail, and your wife in jail. And your 4 kids are going to be orphans. Or you're going to cooperate. You got 35 seconds. So he set me up. And, I was mad about it for decades, but can you blame him? What choice did he have?
Yeah.
I mean, they got your mother and father on the couch going, we're going to take their house, your house, and put you all, because the weed was on, the property was in his father's name.
Yeah.
Now, so he turned me in. I got busted up there, and they wanted me. I was the king. They always want the guy from Florida, right? Because the guy from Florida is where the drugs come from, and that guy knows somebody in Colombia or Jamaica. I'm the guy. I'm the big guy, and I was the head guy. So they hit me with RICO, and I hit Terry with RICO also. Running an ongoing criminal enterprise with racketeering, and that was. I was told that by the cops and my lawyers that they were going to hit me with all 25. So now I have a 1.5-year-old daughter, a newlywed wife. I'm in a jail in Ohio, and I'm looking at. I remember the night that I was there for months trying to get you can't bond out until you get your indictment. And they're stalling the indictment to keep me in there as long as possible, to try to break you and try to, keep you as long as they can in jail, right? And they called me out of my cell one day, and it's some guy, never seen him before. He's wearing, he's city clothes, beige, not the blue or green you'd expect from a prison guard or a police officer. He says, you Ken Behr? And I'm thinking, who else could I be? You just pulled me out of my cell, right? There's only me and this other big black guy in there, and he's not Ken Behr, He's my friend John. He's my cellie. And he goes, they hit me with my indictment. And I open up the paper, and the guard, Bill, who I was kind of friendly with, I mean, the guards were more like me, middle. And Bill looks at me, goes, you going to be okay, kid? He goes, I go, what do you mean? He goes, you're looking at 55 years. We're putting you on suicide watch tonight. I hadn't even read the papers yet. And I just looked at Bill. I go, no need. I'll be all right. And I walked back to my cell and to read the papers. And I think the fact that he said it was 55 years almost was good. Because if he'd have told me it was to 25, I'd have been more nervous, because 55 seemed completely unrealistic. Like, come on. But it was turned out they would hit me with RICO, 25 years. So I finally bonded out after 3 months. My mom put up her house, and I went home and I hired lawyers, and I was broke. I hired $80,000 worth of lawyers. I sold my gold Rolex, sold my boat, sold my car. I didn't have a car. I sold everything I could. And I had the $80,000 worth of weed. My friend that I asked to sit, I had it stashed in a friend's house. He didn't throw it away. Even though he knew I got busted, he hid it in his mom's attic, which I couldn't believe that. Like, anybody would have thought he would have, tossed it in a dumpster.
Yeah.
But it sat for almost 4 months in an attic in the Florida sun. It's 130 degrees up there. So when it came out, I was lucky to get 20 grand for it. And I had to go, sorry about that.
No worries.
I had to do that drug deal. Here I am out on bond, looking at RICO. I have 100 pounds, 80 to 100, I was around 100 pounds of weed. And I had a friend of mine that said, if you give me the weed, I'll sell you for you and I'll get you like 20, 25 grand. And that's a third of what I had in it. But what was I going to do? Maybe even less of what but he goes, I go, well, go over and pick it up at, he goes, nope, you go get it. So that was my last drug deal. I had to sell the shit weed I had left to pay for my, I went broke.
I was going to say you sold weed to fund your defense.
I had to get rid of the last of the weed I had.
Yeah.
Just to live. I went from having everything. Remember, I lost $100,000 in the truck when the truck got busted, right? They took my weed out of the truck. The cops didn't pay for that. $40,000 for the wedding, $10,000 for the ring, $10,000 for the honeymoon, and then another 100,000, 80, 90,000, whatever it was, down to 20. I literally was driving a $400 canary yellow Plymouth station wagon with no air conditioning. I was painting, doing oil changes and tire rotations at a repair shop. But in the middle of that, I had no idea what was going to happen. And then I got the phone call. That's what changed everything.
Which was the phone call? What was that phone call?
I mean, I just got a call from a friend of mine. He was a big yacht broker, was not a drug dealer, but he had gotten tied up in a bust by the DEA for selling, back then you could go to jail for selling a boat to smugglers. It's conspiracy. If I know that you're a drug runner and I'm taking cash from you, or I'm helping you funnel cash to buy something to smuggle, I'm selling you a boat or a plane that you're going to use in a criminal act, you're part of the criminal act. Just like if you and I talk today and I say, hey, you want to rob a bank? I have a car you can buy. I'm part of the conspiracy. That's the way the American laws are today. Even if you know about it, even if you say, Kenny, I'm going to buy that car from you. I'm going to rob a bank with it. And you go, yeah, right, whatever. You told me.
For the record, I'm not buying the car and I'm not robbing a bank. But
yeah, there's no money. Just so we know, there's no money in banks anymore. So anyway.
Yeah, so the call that kind of changes everything.
He says, hey, how would you like to work for the DEA? And I was like, huh? I mean, it was so foreign to me that I didn't want to hear my ex-wife. I turned like, what? What are you talking about? And he said, and he was a great salesman. He was one of the biggest yacht brokers. He would sell jets and yachts to Jimmy Buffett and people like that. He's a serious guy. He says, I'm working for the DEA. Why don't you come work with us? I go, well, why would you ask me along? Well, it turned out I had lunch with him at a quiet little table in a seedy little restaurant in downtown Fort Lauderdale that a lot of people have probably made a lot of deals just like this at. And he convinced me to talk to the DEA, and I did. And the DEA made a deal. It was like multi-level marketing is what he told me. He goes, what you do, I'll get credit for. I said, it's kind of like Amway working for the feds. And he said, yeah, it's like that. They're going to give me credit. And for what you do, I told him you were a big-time smuggler and been in the business forever. Kind of made up, his own little story about how big I might have been. But the truth was I'd, done a lot of smuggling and been around the business my whole life. And so I went up and talked to the DEA, drove up there in my little yellow station wagon with no air conditioning. He was in Jacksonville. So it was a 6-hour drive. And I wore the suit my mother had bought me kind of like in high school because, drug dealers don't really wear suits. And I had a bunch of sport clothes to go to the discos in. Believe me, I had a whole closet full of, fancy ass clothes, but not a suit. And well, I had a suit. I'll tell you, in 1988, when I got busted the first time, I was 35, I think, 88, and I would have been 31. I didn't know how to make a tie. Like the only time I ever had a tie was when I wore a clip-on tie as a kid. I was a drug dealer. I never wore a tie. I had to go to court. Someone had to make the tie for me to go to court. And
you'd lost your dad.
Yeah, who was going to show me? I was lucky to know how to.
Right. Yeah.
True. Lucky I knew how to shave. A friend of the family showed me how to shave, actually. So and drive.
So you drive to Jacksonville.
So
to basically clock in on your first day.
So I went up there, and it's in the book. He he made a deal that I was unbeknownst to me. See, the arresting officers in Ohio that busted me, the head of the drug task force, they knew I couldn't bust anybody in Ohio. 17 people had just busted me. Everybody ratted me out in Ohio. I knew I wasn't going to do anything there. And I had actually made a phone call from prison to my one of my right hand guys in Florida. Said, listen, I got busted because bad news travels fast. All I'm going to tell you is, no matter what I do, no matter what I say to anybody, never ever tell everybody not to talk to me. Not that they were going to anyway, but I took a poison pill. I said, whatever I have to do, I don't know what's going to happen. Don't do it with me. And I so that everybody knew I knew in Hollywood, Fort Lauderdale, that they knew. I knew plenty of people they didn't know, but the people I went to high school with, my friends, the guys that I went skiing with, went to dinner with, my kids from the beach, they all knew. Not that they would have, but I made sure to take that poison pill. So I was not going to bust anybody and never planned to. So I went up to Jacksonville, and he had confiscated a fishing boat, like a 54 Hatteras or something. There's actually a 54 Hatteras parked behind my house on the canal across the street. And we took the two cops from Ohio out on a boat ride. And I first mated the boat. I took my suit off, I was kind of tying the lines and running the boat with the DEA agent. Never met him before in my life. I walked up to him in the parking lot, and he came up to me. He goes, "You Ken Behr?" I said, "Yes, sir." He goes, "Look at you, a drug dealer in a suit. It's kind of like spats on a hog." I have no idea what that means. And I was going to say, but my mom bought it for me. So we go in, we sit in the salon of the boat after we go for this boat ride, and they tell me the deal. I'm going to be now working for the DEA Northern District in Jacksonville, Florida. And everything I do, the state of Ohio and the city of Lorain and the county of Vermilion will get, or Lorain County and Vermilion, whatever it was, will get a piece of it, both credit and money. Because when you work for the federal government, it's all about the Benjamins. I saw a friend of get a suitcase right in front of me for $100,000 cash from the DEA for helping bust a piece of property, like a multi-million-dollar piece of property. He found the drug dealer that owned it. He proved that it was taken. The government confiscated it, and he got 10% of the selling price, $100,000. We used to get money throughout when I was working for him just to have cash to live on. They tell some drug dealer that we were working. Because remember, I was working as like kind of along with the DEA. I set up my own cases, but they also said, "Kenny, you're flying to Canada to do this. That's the biggest case we did in Canada. Or you're going to go here and do that." They used me as an operative.
Did you have
I
any
still had
concerns?
to
Do you have
come
any
up with my own
worries
cases.
or
What's that?
do you have any worries or concerns about working for the feds now?
Well, it's been 32 years.
Well, I mean, now being in the timeline of your story,
Look, I still don't sit with my back to the door. I still look at every face and everybody in the restaurant. Yeah, man, I live that life. I'm never looking back. I mean, I'm looking over my shoulder. I'm telling the story now, and I'm bringing up some stuff that is probably some stuff that, there's still people there's still, I had somebody the other day, and I've been so honest in the book. I've told everything as truthfully as I could. I've not lied or exaggerated. I had a good friend of mine, one of my good friends that I would do anything for, start, lambasting me on the internet about what a scumbag I was. And I said to him, "Man, it's been 32 years. Do I get some redemption? I never did anything to you or anybody but there's people that still, yeah, man, there's people that still hate me, and I did nothing. I got blamed, and if the Lindbergh baby got kidnapped, I got blamed for it. It's just, yeah. So I tell in the book, I tell the truth. I tell the truth. I tell what I did, who I did it to, who I didn't do it to, my life story. I talk about Black and brown incarceration, the war on drugs, the America's involvement in the war on drugs over the years. I'm not, I'm not just telling my story. It's a
When
story
you
of,
when you look back at your life and what you did and kind of the years of running and selling and all that stuff, is there anything that you look back and think that you really do regret that you wish you hadn't done or you wish you had done differently?
well, so my wife left me to raise the kids when they were 8 and 12. She got hooked on not coke, not pot, but big pharma's oxycontin and that whole big pharma.
Yeah.
I I, re, I wish. So I've told my kids, wasted emotions are regret, hate, envy. Those are wasted emotions. Regret, the most, because you can never go back. I wish that I could have saved my family. That my wife didn't get. There's something I could have done to protect her from big pharma and the addiction of oxycontin, and the way she left me and the two kids to. I wish I would have not. I wish I would have had. I've been in fight or flight my entire life. I've been reactive. I wish I was proactive. I've been like a pinball since I was 13, bouncing around in a machine constantly with no plan. I wish I would have had a plan, some guidance. And instead of being, like I said, in survival mode my whole life. I'm 67 years old. I'm in a great place. I've got 4 great kids, 3 great dogs, a beautiful wife that I love, the best woman I've ever met in my life. But I'm still in survival mode. I'm still hustling to make money. I'm still, I've had medical. I've got scars all over my body. From this. Just had my 3rd shoulder surgery, the 2 open heart surgeries. You can see the scars. Here, look, the
Yeah.
pacemaker. So when I look in the mirror, here's a question for you: what's harder? What's stronger? The human body, the physique, or the soul? And I think what you find is you can't hide from the scars, but you can certainly bury the pain. We all bury, as I say in the book, we bury our pain in little shallow graves covered by quiet scars that are easily ripped off by the slightest event. I'm fine until I see a story on TV about a guy whose father dies, or a TV commercial or something. And even, 55 years later, I can just ball up and cry like uncontrollably, or I think about my ex-wife, unfortunately just passed away 3 weeks ago in Houston. She was drugs still finally got her, and she was 59 years old and had a stroke, and it appears to be drug related. So
Yeah, I don't mean to keep bringing it up, but you said a minute or so ago that when you were 13, you've been at like a pinball, right, bouncing around in a machine. But it's also 13 is when you lost your dad,
right,
and that really, it sounds like to me your life is a line. There's a line at that age.
yeah,
Everything happened before and everything that's happened after.
yeah. I think I was a pretty sweet kid before that. I was known to be just this, like just a good kid, and I think I had no guidance, and my mother was destroyed. She was a 30, I think she was not even 40 years old. She was the mother of 3 kids, living in a strange town. We just moved to New Orleans a year and a half, 2 years earlier, and laying on a couch crying. And, I was in charge of, a lot, taking my brother to school, taking the dog to the vet. I kind of landed, a lot of it landed. I got a car when I turned 15, 14. I got my license at 14 then. I got a car at 15. So, I was in charge. I did a lot. My older brother now was getting ready to go to college. He was, so it left a lot on me. And I, I don't know. I never like to use the words I did the best I could, because that's bullshit. But I survived myself. How's that?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Um, Ken, is there anything you want to add before we wrap up? I think that's kind of a good place to wrap up. But I just want to make sure. Is there anything I didn't ask you
No.
that you wanted to make sure you got on the record there?
Well, I want to say that both my two children are doing phenomenally well. You know, my daughter's in the medical field. You know, my son is actually going to be on track to be a federal law enforcement agent. Crazy, right? And so I'm proud. As I say, my kids raised me well. I'd like to throw a shout out to the charity that I represent, Freedom Grow. It's a
Sure.
charity, and if maybe you can put something up there, it's freedomgrow.org. We raise money for nonviolent cannabis prisoners. Some of these guys and gals and kids doing, 20, 30 life in prison for what you can walk into almost any place in America. And, 39 states, it's legal, and it should have never been illegal. And, maybe everybody can just think of, there are people in jail to this day. If we can try to, send a couple bucks to freedomgrow.org, get a pen pal prisoner you can write to, just write to your senator and say, come on, enough is enough. So that's kind of, I guess, the only thing I have to say about what I'd like to help get
And the
back.
book is called One Step Over the Line.
Confessions of a Marijuana Mercenary. Man, I
And
have a copy.
I imagine available wherever you get your books, Amazon, all those
Yeah.
things.
People say, the hardest thing? People go, that's you? And I go, yeah. And they go, God, I realize how old I got when they think that's like, people go, wow, that guy looks great. What happened to you? So I have a picture of the old guy on the back.
Oh,
But
that's funny.
yeah, it's on Amazon. It's on Kindle. I did the Audible book myself. I'll say this. Another thing that we never really broached, but I failed first grade. I'm profoundly dyslexic. So I failed first grade. I barely really graduated high school. I wrote the book myself. I edited it myself, and I did the audio myself also. So, and it actually won an award on Amazon for a curated top new true crime. So, thank God I did a good job. Imagine putting it all out there and then the book sucked. What a schmuck I'd be.
Yeah, exactly. Ken, thanks so much for your time, man. And I wish you the best of luck. We really appreciate the time.
I got to tell you, you've been great. Thank you so much. Thank you.